From Fast Cat Coaching, I'm Frank Overton, and this is our Training Tips Podcast. Being able to get faster is based on being able to FTFP.
You gotta cry in the dojo to laugh on the battlefield.
The shit that will kill them. And I was always an advocate that you could accomplish more with sweet spot training than riding in zone 2 alone. Full gas, as hard as you can. Performance, endurance, nutrition, and weight loss is all about your food choices. And that's what winning in the kitchen is. What would Alaphilippe do? Just feel yourself getting faster. Welcome back, everyone. This is the Big Cat here, and this is part 2 of the Pat Warner, Ben Sharp, Olympic and Masters champion coaches podcast. How are you guys?
Great today. Thanks, Frank.
Yep, doing awesome.
Happy Friday. Happy Friday. Ben, I understand that you are racing in Indiana this weekend.
I am. I'm doing the Indy Crit this evening, or no, the Mass Avenue Crit this evening and Indy Crit tomorrow. And I actually got to spend a little time in the stands at the Major Taylor Velodrome last night watching some of the Collegiate National Track Cycling Championships.
Nice. I think Coach Jake is there taking pictures for everyone.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to that velodrome before?
Me, no, never.
I was referring to Benjamin.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, if I'm not mistaken, Pat, as we covered in part 1, that's where we met. In 1989, I think.
Correct.
Wow. That's one for the ages. And then, Pat, I understand you have some non-cycling activities on your schedule this weekend.
I do, but I am going to squeeze in a crit on Sunday. Something I don't do very often, but Friday and Saturday going to Red Rocks, a local place to see concerts. One of the best places to see concerts.
Oh yeah. Who's playing there this weekend?
So it's a mixture. Tonight is Need to Breathe, and tomorrow's Brandy Carlisle.
Nice. That's awesome. That place is amazing for everyone out there. It is this magical rock formation. It's kind of like literally at the base of the Rocky Mountains right outside of Golden, Colorado. And yeah, it's a super fun place to see a concert. So that's awesome, Pat. Well, guys, thank you so much for being back on the podcast for part 2. And I think where we left off last week, Ben, you were explaining or just describing your work with Ashton Lambie and what you learned from working with him.
Yeah, I worked with Ashton through the end of 2019, just helping him get through some of the team pursuit stuff he was doing with the aim to qualify for the Tokyo Games. Unfortunately, the program missed qualifying, and then the pandemic came, and so the program basically got shuttered, or at least paused for a while. But Ashton, during that time that we were working together, he did break the individual pursuit world record on 2 occasions, and had it in the back of his mind way back then that he would try to go for a sub 4-minute attempt at the individual pursuit. The individual pursuit's 4 kilometers, about 2.5 miles, and from a standing start, he was going to aim to eclipse or go under 4 minutes, which, for those of you doing math at home, that's over 60 kilometers an hour, over 37 miles an hour from a standing start for 4 minutes, which is no small feat.
Beast mode.
Yeah, definitely beast mode. And so I
think it's important to point out, in one gear. Imagine starting that gear and just getting to that speed without even holding it there.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You don't have the option to shift gears on a track bike. So, one of the things that I learned from him was just, or one of the things that's unique about him is just his tolerance for workload and his ability to, come back to the bike day after day, smash out whatever work is set for him that day, as well as maintain a good strength routine and program. And I spent a summer trying to break him and failed. I had to call Uncle before he did because he had some racing coming up. And I didn't actually tell him that we were going to do this, but I was just loading on the work and the volume, and intensity and the strength work day after day, literally week after week. And he never cracked. He never showed any signs of slowing down. And I think that, he revealed then just what kind of a special athlete he is.
And can you elaborate on the amount of volume and work you were having him do?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about Ashton is that, well, there are a lot of interesting things about Ashton. One of the interesting things about Ashton, besides his mustache, is, he has this desire to be the best individual pursuiter in the world, but he also, he really enjoys just riding his bike. And, so during this period, he's trying to set records or in records. I mean, this isn't specifically a record that he went for during this time, but historically, something he has done, which was the record to ride across the state of Kansas, or to participate and excel in gravel races. And he has a sponsorship with a company for his gravel exploits. So you're doing this balance between really long, hard miles and really short, very intense work. And like I said, he was able to go day after day. His CTL climbed to very, very high levels, north of 150 at times, where he's just training day in and day out.
That's a lot. Yeah, and for everyone out there, 150, 160, that's the level that Tour de France riders were to emerge from the Pyrenees or the Alps with in the course of a 3-week Grand Tour. So that is quite a lot. And then how, like your work with Ashton, what did you learn from his just human prowess that you applied to your work with Jennifer Valente?
Yeah, I think that this kind of applies to all of our sort of professional athletes, where as important as the work is, the recovery is equally as important, if not more important. And the luxury that professional or Olympic athletes have is they're athletes full time. And what I find with age group athletes or masters athletes is that they have enough time to train the volume that, in most cases that we really want them to train. The issue becomes when they don't have the time or the ability to recover the way that they need to recover. And what I saw with Ashton, for example, was that because he's a lifestyle athlete and he's doing it full time, I was able to, or I have been able to, help some of my masters athletes reprioritize the recovery part of the training process. And there have been times when I will tell an athlete that, for their continued improvement, we're going to focus more on recovery than any specific part of their training. And you might even pass up a training opportunity in the name of trying to recover a little bit better. So for example, if something big has happened at work and they're having to spend more time in front of their computer, or something happens with their family and they're having to, just dedicate more time to something than was expected, I have found that, using that time or using the limited time to recover from that and to absorb whatever training they've done has been more critical than actually doing more training.
I love that. That is fantastic. And then leading into the next question, while you were saying that, I was wondering how much Ashton sleeps per night. If that is, if you were monitoring that.
Yeah, I mean, he has been on a Whoop. I don't know if he still is. I don't have access to his data, but he's a sleeper. He has no problems sleeping for 8 hours plus per night.
Mm-hmm. And I was gonna just chide Pat a little bit for
Hmm.
I think Pat, you were saying you were like at six ish, and you had like Ben got you to get over 6.5 one time.
Yeah, I hear it all the time. I know. No, I do. I think it's really important that people understand it because I've made a significant change on focus on that, and it has made a difference. Even it's not the number 8 or 9 hours that some people are looking for. The fact that you think about it, the fact that you don't get up or you make a conscious effort to bring it up from where you are. That's really what matters at this point for me. I may never get to 8 hours, but the fact that I've gotten better at recovering and spending time not doing something, I think has been beneficial.
I'm looking on his Whoop data right now, and for the last 30 days, Pat has averaged 6 hours and 48 minutes of sleep, which is a
Ooh.
great improvement from probably
Mhm.
6 months ago when it was less than 6 hours.
Nice work, Pat.
Thanks. There's a couple weeks of vacation in there, so that's probably pretty helpful.
So we preach age and recovery ability based training loads a lot on the podcast, and we've kind of just skirted around it. But can both of you compare and contrast like Pat's training load, to like Ashton's or just like all the other elite cyclists you've worked with, like in terms of hours per week and peak CTLs and just overall like your observations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it follows a trend that you would very much expect. The biggest limiter for most athletes is just the amount of time available. And, of course, how we fill that limited time changes and has a seasonality to it. But, if someone can only train 10 hours a week, I think that you're very hard pressed to see someone get over a CTL of, say, 70. And then if someone is able to train 20 hours a week, then I think that you're going to see CTLs, well into the hundreds. So you look at someone like Pat, who's working full time. I think we covered this before. He's a dad. He's a husband. He has a lot of responsibility with his job, and just is supportive of his family. I think that we see weeks certainly above 10 hours, but very rarely above 14 or 15 hours. And for some of the elite athletes, especially road-focused athletes, and I'm sure Frank, you could comment on this, that it's not uncommon for a 14 or 15-hour week to be a very moderate to even, I wouldn't call it low volume, but not a very taxing week for more established professional road athletes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The track athletes are a different breed because so much of their training, when they're in a heavy track block, they don't get much time on the bike really at all, but the intensity is just super, super high. And I don't think that we have the best tools for tracking what that load is for those athletes. So it's not uncommon for an athlete to do a full track session where they might do, five, let's just to make it simple, 5 3-minute efforts with full recovery between. And the stress that gets logged from that really doesn't replicate their perceived effort or their perceived fatigue on an acute level. So you have to really communicate with the athlete on how they're feeling and what their perceptions are versus relying on specifically or exclusively recorded data.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would add to this whole conversation that there's so much talk about CTL, and I know that there's people that chase CTL, and I maybe used to be one of those. But for all those listeners out there, I'll tell you that your CTL is not the answer 100% to how you're going to perform.
Mm-hmm.
So allow your coach to run that CTL up and down, and it doesn't really matter if it's 70 80, 90, or 100 doesn't mean that you're going to go fast for the event. So it's really the what kind of work you're going to do that creates that. So I've actually gotten to the point where if somebody asks me what my CTL is, I usually can't answer that question. I don't really know because I've learned that if I just do the work that I'm supposed to be doing, that I'll be ready. And sometimes it is a little higher, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to race faster that week.
Yeah, yeah, it's the amount of like Pat. You can say that because I think you're doing quite a bit of interval work. Is that safe to say, Ben?
Yeah, very much so.
I think a lot of athletes out there, or just in the probably podcast listeners, are just trying to ride a lot. That's the CTL conundrum versus doing VO2s or 1 minuters or any interval work. And I think Pat, you hit the nail on the head with that observation. And Ben, I really like what you said about the training load of track cyclists and them being a different breed and not fully being able to quantify the stress from a 5 by 3 minute training session. Do you employ other than communication? Are you using any other metrics or technology, or is it just good old fashioned how are you feeling?
A lot of it is just good old fashioned how are you feeling, and then the evidence when you're tracking progress. For example, power performed over that 3 minutes. You can look at trends, workout on workout, and then also the stopwatch. We have all this technology, but at the end of the day, especially on the track and especially in the timed events on the track, all you're trying to do is go faster than someone else. And our best tool for measuring that is going to be a stopwatch. But as far as training load and the absorption of that training load, very much relying on the athlete, as well as some of the metrics we get from the Whoop, for example, with HRV and resting heart rate and quality of recovery. Those are certainly what I would consider secondary metrics that might help influence the training a little bit on a day-to-day basis, but aren't necessarily the end-all be-all.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about workouts. Let's talk about the hardest ones that athletes hate, but you love because they have the highest return in terms of like form and power output. I'd love to hear what both of you have to say about that.
I would say it's an interesting question because I classify workouts that athletes hate into two bins. One is athletes hate it but love the return, and then athletes just hate it. As a coach, one that I just really love this version of kind of a Tabata interval that I've been doling out here the last couple of years, and it's a 3-set interval with 12 or 15 30-second on, 15-second off efforts. But the first one starts with a 1 minute all-out effort, just kind of deplete the anaerobic system entirely, and then go immediately into 15 seconds refs and then 30 seconds on, and do that 10 times. Not the 1 minute. The only 1 minute's only once. And it's an interesting workout because so many of the workouts that we do, I'm giving training zones and they're looking at their power meter and they're trying to stay within a certain range or whatever. And this one is completely different from that, where every on interval is intended to be 100% max effort. And so, you have this law of diminishing returns where your power is just going to drop throughout the interval. But your body's adapting to the workload. Your heart rate's actually increasing throughout the interval sets. And I have athletes, calling me afterwards and saying, well, I started off and I was doing 450 watts, but it was a really horrible workout because by the last interval I was doing 350, and I'm saying, no, sounds like you did it perfectly, and that's exactly how we needed to do it. And it does take athletes a couple times to really have the faith that they're doing it correctly when they do see their power drop. And especially with the tools that I use when I assign a workout to an athlete, they're given a range of power that they're supposed to hit with those intervals. And so I'm having to uneducate them or de-educate them from what they've been taught with 99% of the work that they're doing. Another favorite of mine, and this is just a bread and butter workout, is just the old standard 2x20 threshold. I think that it's a great mental workout. It's an awesome psychological workout, as well as a very challenging physical workout. And I know there's nothing sexy about that one, but as far as bang for your buck and with a time crunched athlete, I think it's a fantastic effort.
I agree. What's the one that athletes just hate?
I can answer that.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is one that doesn't happen very often, but it's one that when you see come up, and Ben said it, sometimes you hate it because of what it is, and then you love it because of the accomplishment. So this is one that he gives to me not very often, but he calls it the big ride. So it starts off with just a normal warm up, and then it's 6 by 15-second full out sprints, followed by 20 minutes of tempo, followed by 4x4 VO2s, followed by 15 minutes of tempo, followed by 2x20s, followed by 15 minutes of tempo, and then you end it with 5.
Yeah, we're not done yet.
Yeah, then you end it with 5x1 all out 1 minute efforts, and then you do 15 minutes of endurance, and then you're done.
Holy shnikes.
So for those that couldn't add that up, it's 4.5 hours, but yeah, when you get it, you're like, damn it. And then after you do it, you're like, I can't believe I just did that.
How many times have you done that, Pat?
Not that often. It's Ben can probably answer more than I can, but it's definitely not a regular thing. A couple times a year, maybe.
Yeah.
And is that like a sharpening the sword workout that you'd use to win Masters Nationals?
I think it's Ben's mad at me.
Let's see what I can make the monkey do.
Yeah, that's kind of what it feels like.
I think of that workout as it's another really good psychological one because one of my overlying philosophies, and there's nothing earth-shattering about this, is just to make training harder than racing. And Pat will never do a race that is more demanding than that workout. And so if he's able to get through that workout, then I know that any racing that he's going to do is going to be easier, and he knows that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm curious, do you apply the same interpretation or analysis to the power of the big ride workout that Pat just described to, say, like your Tabata style, where it's not really based on levels, it's based on just like the psychology and the effort?
I think that one, the big ride, is definitely a paced workout. So there are levels or zones that are kind of expected based on previous performances. But I would say that for most athletes, by the time they're getting to the back part of that ride, especially the last 1 minute efforts, those kind of fall into that same realm as that Tabata, where it's just 1 minute as hard as you can do. And if you can do 500 watts, great. If you can do 350 watts, that's great.
Yeah.
Because I think that there's definitely, an element of fatigue there, and just energy management that may or may not have been addressed properly, and I think you'll see that wash out in the data.
Mm-hmm. I think there's like an element of just grit and tenacity of just not quitting and doing the workout, and as opposed to maybe just being like, oh, my legs are toast, I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk about workouts that athletes love. like Pat, what is a workout you love to see on your training plan from Ben?
I I have two answers to that. Obviously, the ones that have the short work are easy because the way I think about them is, if you're doing the Tabata workout that he just described, if you break it down, if it's an hour and a half workout, you're only doing work for, it depends on how many sets, but if you're only doing 30 seconds on 10 times, that's only 15 minutes of work. So for me, that's the way I'd leave my house. I'm like, well, I only have to do 15 minutes of work today, even though it's an hour and a half ride. So those are always good to see. But I'm with Ben. I like some of the mentally challenging ones. Threshold may not be, 2x20s or 3x20s or 4x15s or whatever. Being able to sustain and know you have a lot of time to think about it, and you have mentally you have to push through those each time. I do enjoy those because I just like the mental preparation and the time that you have. If it's only 30 seconds or a minute, I always feel like anybody can do that, even though it's hard. But the longer one, sometimes, as you said, Frank, you just it's easy to say I'm done, or I'm not going to do the last minute or whatever. And I think that helps you or helps me get ready for the races.
Nice. I think the sheer fact that you just mentioned Tabatas and 2x20s as your favorite workouts is probably why you're Masters national champion. I mean, that's all mindset right there. How about you, Ben? What's like Jennifer Valente's favorite workout, for example?
That's a tough one for a variety of reasons, but I would say that she's not a big fan of the sustained workloads. Having her do 2x20s up Woodman or something in Colorado Springs is not her favorite challenge. She loves riding her bike for sure. I think that she enjoys doing some of the specific track work that we did, especially preceding Tokyo. So, for example, the race simulations that we're doing behind the motor, for example, so motor-paced race efforts, that is something that she definitely enjoys, and she understands the correlation, the direct correlation between performance in those workouts and performance in competition. She loves riding her bike, like I said, so even just a mountain bike ride at the Air Force Academy for her is very satisfying. And I think of it as kind of like secret training from the standpoint of it's a fairly flat route, but there are some punchy hills, and so she's getting a little bit of intensity in there without even necessarily realizing it, and she's definitely not staring at a power meter or staring at zones or anything like that. And it's keeping her, her handling skills sharp, and just keeping her out on the bike and enjoying pedaling it.
Mm-hmm. And what about where does motor pacing fall on your tricks of the trade and difficulty? Because I know you all both motor pace each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, motor pacing I think is an important element, especially I like to use it really close to a race event to simulate the racing. And for example, for Pat, I don't think we did too much this year, but in years past, especially when we were preparing for Masters Track World Championships, we've done a lot of motor pace points race simulations. So we have a little route just north of town, north of Boulder, that we use, and we know it very well, and we'll set up sprint points on that route. And sometimes my wife will drive for us, and both of us will be on the motor, and we'll be sprinting with each other or against each other, or we'll just do a variety of different workouts. And what I like about motor pacing is that it gives us the opportunity to execute race tactics or race demands at race speed. I mean, you can do all the intervals you want on your own, but you're probably not going to be approaching the speed of a peloton in that training. But when you throw the motor into the mix, it just, it allows for even more specificity and kind of free speed work.
Yeah, Frank, I think what he's forgetting to say what he likes about it is he likes looking in the rearview mirror and watching us suffer.
There's something to that.
Tough love, maybe.
Well, I
Yeah.
can't do it on my own on the bike, so I have to have a motor to make that guy suffer.
Well, that's awesome. I love motor pace, and I think it's just the utopian coach athlete workout because you get to be out there with the athlete. You can tell a lot from their grit and just their ability to suffer from going hard behind the motor that you're driving. Switching gears a teeny bit. We talk a lot about sweet spot on the podcast, and I'm curious how you would use maybe an intensity like that, and the volume you would use it various times of the year that depending on what the phase the athlete is in.
Yeah, to be fair, I don't have, in my training zones, I don't have a zone that I call sweet spot. I do have, kind of a sub-threshold or tempo zone, and then I include sort of below threshold as part of the threshold zone. And so there would be times when I assign training to an athlete and I'll say, make this a high tempo or low threshold sort of range, which I think kind of includes that sweet spot area. I really like giving extended, I guess, intervals or time bouts in that intensity, just for the aerobic development, for the same reasons that we mentioned before about doing those 2x20 threshold efforts as well. And I tend to hit on those a lot in kind of the pre-season training, not specific, in the race prep time, but in the period that I kind of refer to, the training to train period, where we're just, building our aerobic capacity, our ability to produce power at a reasonably high level, and just working on economy and efficiency.
And it also sounds, having heard that, that's part of the big rod where I think where those tempo blocks you were talking about, Pat.
Correct.
Yeah, very much so.
Well, this could be a question for both of you. What have you learned from the top ranks that, and we've kind of talked about this too, that like I guess trickles down to how you can help masters racers?
I think I would hit on that recovery point again, just how critical that is. And I have conversations with other coaches. A really good friend of mine is a very accomplished triathlon coach, and so we often have some coaching discussions. And one of the things that I said to him years ago, and you have to take it with a grain of salt, but what I said was that I think it's really hard to overtrain an athlete, but it's really easy to under-rest an athlete. And that to me just hammers home that point of how critical and important recovery is. And if you have basically 24 hours a day to be an athlete, it's really hard to train so much that you get into that chronic overtraining situation, as long as you are dedicating the same amount of energy to recovering as you are to training. However, when you take an age group athlete or a masters athlete who only has an hour and a half to train per day, but is working 8 or 9 hours a day, and then has family time and other demands on their time, I think that they're a supreme candidate for overtraining, or more accurately, under-resting. And so I think that lesson of the importance of recovery and rest can certainly be applied to the masters or amateur athlete. It's such an important component to being able to function on a day-to-day level, and that's where communicating with your coach when things have gone sideways is really important, so that we can make some adjustments to our training.
Yeah, I am reminded of a quote from Alan Lim, who says something along the lines of, there's no such thing as overtraining, but there is such a thing as under recovering.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so
Dang, I thought that was an original thought for me.
I wonder what would be the top three things when you're working with a masters athlete that you would advise for recovery. If you notice, hey, you're training really well. One of the limitations I see here is your ability to recover. Let's work on that. Do this, this, and this.
I'd say sleep. Have great sleep hygiene. Experiment a little bit with your sleep environment. The temperature and the darkness. That to me is a big one. I would say food is fuel. I would not encourage that type of athlete to do fasted training. And I would say, food is fuel on the other end too, as far as recovery and having a plan. I think we talked about this a little bit last week, that having a nutrition plan is super important, because you can get into that low energy state very easily if you go straight from your lunch ride into a meeting and then into a phone call and into your regular workday without having taken on any calories to replenish what you spent during the workout.
Yeah, I love that. No fasted rides. It's more people need to hear that, I think. I'm glad you said that. What would be the third thing? Or it was that three?
I was hoping that was three.
What do you have them like any meditation or just like how like things to do to offset like stress from like taxes or work or anything like that?
One little sneaky thing is I think that there's some conflicting data on the efficacy of using things like Normatec compression.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't seen anything definitive as far as how much it aids in recovery. It certainly aids mentally. I think that most people feel like they feel better after they do a session of boots. But what I like about them, especially for masters athletes, is they require the athlete to sit still.
Yeah.
And they may not necessarily be getting this huge benefit from the compression, but I think that for a lot of people that are burning the candle at both ends, taking that 20 or 30 or 40 minutes or whatever that is required to be in those boots does a lot for just resettling and kind of resetting for the day or for the evening.
I like that. I think the couch is one of the greatest recovery tools, and I'm not not sitting upright, but laying on it, even for just 30 minutes, reading a book, watching TV, just not moving, not getting up. Well, okay, so shifting gears once again, Pat, and so for the listeners out there, everyone, both Pat and Ben work at Stages Cycling. Stages makes power meters, and Pat, you're an expert. Can you tell us a little bit about the strain gauge technology that Stages uses in a way for us non-physics majors to understand?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the goal is to measure how much work you're doing, and there's several different ways to get there. But the way we get there is we actually use strain gauges on the crank arms. And what does that mean? Basically, a strain gauge is a way of measuring how much your crank bends. So most people wouldn't think about it, but when you pedal your bike, your crank arms are bending, and we can detect the smallest amount of bend. So even when you put your pedals at the 3 and 9 o'clock position, we can detect how much weight your pedals are applying to the crank. So once we know how much you're bending the crank and how fast it's moving, then we can tell you how much power you're doing. So we've chosen to put it there for a lot of reasons, but it's a place that it never wears out. It never needs maintenance. It's super light. It's less than 20 grams per side. And it's standard on everybody's bike, and you can run whatever gear selection you'd want and chain rings, that type of stuff. So, but yeah, really, it's a simple way of seeing how much work you're doing. It's complex in how you design it and make it, but in theory, it just comes down to how much you're bending your crank arm on every pedal stroke. And we measure that in both directions, when you're pushing down and the weight of your leg not being picked up on the other side too. So it's super sensitive way to do it, and it's super clean and easy, once you've figured out how to do it.
Nice. You make it sound so simple.
Well, thank you. That's a compliment. Anytime a consumer sees something as simple, then we've been successful. It wasn't simple to get there. And, from a firmware and software and designing the strain gauges and all that, it is very complex, and the process of applying them is complex. But from a consumer standpoint, we want it to be simple.
Mm-hmm. And y'all are coming up on your 10-year anniversary of the product being available to the public. Is that right?
Yeah, we are. This would be the 10th year of the product, and the company's 12 years old this year, which is, I don't know where that went, but.
Oh, congratulations. I mean, you guys changed the landscape of not only power meters, but just the way you brought more power meters to the everyday athlete to enable them to, ride faster.
Yeah, that was definitely the goal. I mean, and some people remember this and some people don't, but I mean, it wasn't that long ago when a power meter was, $2,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that made it, I remember the days of people making a choice. Do you buy a power meter for your race wheel, or do you buy a power meter for your training wheel? Or, one bike gets a power meter, but we definitely want you to be able to have power on all your setups. If it's mountain bike, road bike, track bike, and making it affordable, so that was the goal. And as we've seen, you can get into power meters for $300 now. So it's definitely been successful to get people to be able to ride power every day they go out and ride.
Yeah. Yeah. You can control what you can measure, I think, is something like the expression goes. Pat, you obviously are, air quotes, doing it right, winning Masters Nationals this year. Ben in the podcast last week said 18 national championships, 4 world championships. Can you share your mindset with us about working with a coach and trusting them and following the plan that Ben gives you?
Absolutely. It's, as an athlete, we like to have control at times, but I can tell you that there's a bigger plan than that week and that day and that month. The plan for the year, and Ben likes to remind me that we don't train to feel good while we're training. We train to feel good while we're racing, right? So it's easy to second guess, look at it, but I'm here to say, if you have a good plan or a good coach, if you stick with it and you follow it, then you will be successful. Don't try to, and this is my opinion, don't try to change it midstream. Don't start second guessing it. You've got to go through the process, and once you go through the process and follow the plan, you will be successful.
FTFP. Ben, any comments on that as well?
I think that, Pat's absolutely right. I think, though, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be communicating with your coach when things do go sideways. No one has a great ride every day if you're following any sort of training. You're going to have those bad days. And it's okay to have those bad days. And sometimes they're expected, sometimes they're planned for, and sometimes they come out of the blue. And I think that communicating with your coach, trying to nail down potentially what might have caused that, I would say that 75% of the time it really has nothing to do with the bike and probably whatever transpired off the bike preceding a workout. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to nail down what that cause might be, and if it needs to be addressed with a slight revision to your training, or if we just keep moving forward depending on where we are in our training with our phase and what we're trying to accomplish at that time. So even though the overarching message here is to keep pressing and to stick to the plan, I think that that communication with your coach when things aren't as they would have been expected to be is super, super important.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me add to that. And when I say stick with it is true. I don't remember if it was. I think it was in June. I had a pretty bad cold, and I certainly remember either calling or sending a text to Ben and said, "Well, there goes my season. I'm not gonna be able to pull through this one." And of course, we adjusted for that. And what I mean by stick with it and follow through is, yeah, he adjusted what we were doing during that time, but it was mentally for a few days. It was, you just feel like you're losing everything. But when you get through it and then you get right back to it and you follow where the big overarching plan that you have for the year, obviously it worked out fine. But during the week of, or that workout that's bad or whatever, just look at the big picture. Even if you do need to adjust it, the overarching plan is what you have to stick with.
Mm-hmm. I think what you guys just hit on is that when you communicate and make decisions together as a coach-athlete team, that's going to net the best outcome. And it's not necessarily about, sticking through the plan, or I see a lot of athletes make decisions for themselves without consulting their coach, and that's the whole purpose of having a coach. But it also goes both ways. The coach making decisions that may confuse the athlete without having communicated that. And so, yeah, it really just comes down to communication. But I like both of your mindsets, because that is where the success comes from. Last question. We kind of just were talking about that. Can you all share the value of having a coach, having a good relationship on top of the plan? Like in Pat, you mentioned getting sick or maybe getting injured. What I was referencing before we started recording is, who are you going to call, right, when something happens?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I had an accident in October where I shattered my elbow, detached my tricep, broke some ribs, broke my shoulder, and 2 surgeries later, here we are. But during that time, if I didn't have Ben to help me through those times and work out custom stuff that I could do indoors, one arm, it would have been impossible for me to get through by myself. And of course, I had the ups and downs, but the communication almost on a daily basis through that was hugely important for me, both mentally and to know that we had a plan to be ready for road nationals coming out of that. I was 6 months of indoor riding before I could ride outside and put any weight on my arm. And without a big plan, meaning throughout the year, and working through it at that time, we would have never gotten there.
Yeah, that is the essence of the coach-athlete relationship. I didn't realize you were off the outdoor bike for 6 months. Clearly, whatever you did was instrumental in your success this past summer.
Yeah, I would say I was off the outdoor bike, but I would say that I didn't miss much training time, even with multiple surgeries. It is pretty interesting to race Zwift with one arm, though. I'll tell you, it's not easy.
Yeah. Wow, Ben, anything to add there with Pat there?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. When I take on a new athlete, I ask them. I don't have a contract with them specifically, but I ask them to commit to a year, and understand that that's my commitment to them, and that that's what I'm expecting them to commit to with me. And I think of that first year as sort of just a learning period. I think that we learn to speak each other's language. Maybe they learn about training and the vocabulary that I use around training, and then I have to learn about them and their feedback. And I think that first year, it's more like having a plan from the standpoint of it starts off as me as the coach saying, okay, this is what I want you to do today, and then the athlete goes and does it and then tells me how it was. And then as we learn to speak the same language, I think it becomes much more collaborative. And I think that that's that's absolutely the strength that Pat and I have working together. It's just that ability to speak openly and honestly about his training and what my expectations are and where we're headed. And I think you have to develop that trust over time. And I believe that it's only after you get into that sort of collaborative period of the relationship that the true value of the coach reveals itself. And when that trust has been cultivated, you can have those super honest conversations about how things are going and where you want to be, and you can develop and sort of, modify and revise the plan as needed based on that feedback and that information.
Truer words. I love that. Yeah. And then you mentioned 1 year, but is that that's like the introductory year, and then you would really like to work with them on a long-term basis to build that trust and tap into the true power of the coaching?
Yeah, anytime I start with an athlete,